Hello, this is a commentary and perhaps a question or a discussion starter, conversation starter I have in mind to share in particular with Carl and Paul, um, who both use applied kinesiology. And I looked over Paul's primalrejuvenation.com webpage, a few pages within it, and he has an integrated approach that I very much like. I've actually talked to Carl about kind of adopting an integrated approach like that. Um, One of the methods that Paul uses is applied kinesiology or pendulums and other feedback mechanisms to assess um, things like proper dietary protocols for someone, or could be any kind of protocol, I guess, could be tested. Um, I just thought that I'm going to share this with Vicky, who's also familiar with the Body Talk system, which can not only inform people's dietary protocols, but how much water they should have. And um, people could also assess things like different practices that are appropriate for them in terms of like postural corrections or things to adjust the bone structure of their palate or their skull, ways to restructure their plates of their skull, or their jaw to expand their jaw, all sorts of little details there. So the muscle testing is really the kind of the key point of reference. Muscle testing can be used to assess things like how much UV exposure should someone have, which bulb should they buy, what kind of clothing should they wear. Should it be organic fibers, or does it, for somebody, is it fine if they use polyester and nylon fibers or something, synthetic fibers? So there's all these different issues. In Paul's website, he sets up 5 groups of issues, and it's reasonably well organized in the sense of it's coherent. You can see that the different things are distinct and they are, related, and they do all work together to promote health. So I definitely like that aspect of it. One of the key things that I have had in mind is, what is it that actually produces the different results that we get from muscle testing, or if there's a pendulum or something like that, what actually causes those indicators or those signals? I know with working with Carl extensively, we test polarity. We can do things like find that polarity is off, have a few, a certain amount of water, and polarity's now working just because of increase in the water. So we can test, is there an issue with polarity? Is that issue related to water? Address it immediately and then do other testing. So I want to bring up the subject of bacteria. So I'm reading this morning, about UV light. I have a couple UV lights pointing at me right now. UV light hits the retina if there's no glasses to shield the retina from the UV light. Then the UV light hits the retina. That can produce dopamine. Dopamine gets transferred into a certain part of the brain, and we're happy. And that's how addictions form. That's how all sorts of motivations and emotional associations, just all sorts of stuff happens in the brain in relation to dopamine. The article said things like, well, certain parts of the year there'll be different amounts of UV light, so that will produce different amounts of dopamine, and that will control the different kinds of bacteria that are in the intestines or anywhere else. The skin, even. Now the skin bacteria might not be controlled by the eye. The feedback loop that starts in the eye. It can obviously be just like whatever light frequencies hit the skin is going to affect the bacteria that are on the skin. But so if the UV light is low and people don't have all that dopamine, not only are they going to be depressed, but they're going to have certain kinds of bacteria flourish in their digestive tract, and those bacteria will actually create reinforcement for certain dietary choices and send those signals back up to the brain, creating addiction. So if the bacteria want sugar or carbohydrates in general, there will be a feedback loop constructed in which the brain is rewarded and feels pleasure from carbohydrate consumption or consumption of various other things. So there's these different bacteria. They produce different rewards for different foods, and they all can be controlled by the seasons. So ideally, or from an evolutionary perspective, the reasons that all this stuff is the way it is that people who are at the equator or in a deep, harsh winter or in a really hot summer, wherever they are on the planet, because summer and winter are places, not times, or not just times, in the sense that in Australia and in Europe, you will have two different seasons at the same time. So seasons are places as much as they are times. Anyway, so what is it that forms our response with the pendulum, with muscle testing, whatever? Is it that bacteria, parasites, viruses, any other kind of living organism can actually be influential within that feedback cycle? So the end point really is, does this stuff work well? If we use muscle testing and so on, and make a well-organized set of routines, things to stop doing, to do less, things to do more, and things to do very ritualistically, meaning with a great deal of attention to when to do it, how much to do, how often to do it, all that. So there's these different levels of things to avoid, things to do more, things to do less, and then routines to establish. So with all that, do they work well? And if they do, ultimately that really is the issue. But how do we determine work well? To me, it's not just a matter of health. It's also a matter of things like their overall satisfaction with life, their effectiveness. Obviously, I don't want to get too deep into that, but the idea that I'm raising is, clearly muscle testing can be used to organize a protocol for an individual, customized protocol. This is apparently what Paul has done for I don't know how long, but I really like what I saw there on his privalrejuvenation.com page or pages. And is it important to address things like, we need to be in sunlight, to be grounded, to have UV, and to be well hydrated when we do the muscle testing? Those are the kinds of, questions that I'm curious about, and I'd like feedback. I mentioned later into the recording here that I thought to share this with Vicki. I will, but certainly Carl has extensive experience, and then with at least certain range of things. And then Paul, I don't know exactly how much experience you have, Paul, but you might have considered some of these issues. You might have explored some of these issues. You might have made some determinations. So I'm inviting you to comment on this, and we could set this up as a discussion where a few of us discuss it. Not just one or two of us, or not just two or three of us. What else? I guess I'm shivering because I'm cold, and I think there must have been some other research on how cold also alters what bacteria flourish. So I want to re-emphasize this point of if like 85 or something % of the organic, of the cells in our body are not human and are bacteria, or some ridiculous proportion, some startling proportion, then it could be relevant to manage, are we using temperature and light and physics, charge, grounding, pH? Are we using physics really well to set up really good feedback systems as far as pendulum swinging or applied kinesiology, muscle testing, all that kind of stuff. So that, I guess, I've covered what I wanted to cover. How well does it work, and how important is it to kind of set up really good feedback signals when using these muscle testing and other related kinds of feedback mechanisms? How important is it to really establish a good solid foundation, then do those create a protocol through muscle testing and so on? And then the other issue would be, here's another issue from a practitioner perspective or from my own perspective. If we set up a protocol, what do I need to do as far as light or whatever else, cold, to have those things be done early in the sequence so that I'm setting up the right bacteria for the results that interest me? And obviously different people could come for a consultation with different orientations. There might be an athletic performance orientation, which has kind of a short-term but very specific outcome in mind. Fertility could be a very specific thing if somebody's infertile or sterile and they want to become fertile in a certain period of time. So whatever people's different stated motivations are as far as what they pay for, that's a big deal. From a consulting perspective, there's also, from my perspective, what of my goals do I want to orient towards? And this gets back to that dopamine thing of, I want to have the right bacteria to have, whatever that means, to have the right amount of dopamine so I can be motivated powerfully to approach the targets that are really attractive and magnetic, where I can do some small changes, immediately experience some positive feedback loops in terms of dopamine and the reward mechanisms in the brain. I'm like, yes, I want this more. And then that can snowball into more extensive protocols covering different aspects of life. So if there's a really big issue with somebody's hydration, or they're drinking really bad water, or they're doing a couple things that are really detrimental, then that would be good for a practitioner to know, even if they didn't necessarily tell somebody initially. Maybe you notice that, and then you set up some foundations to help them build momentum, and you're going to come back to this other issue once they build some momentum, because we can anticipate, I'm saying we from like a team perspective possibly, we can anticipate that people need to have a certain amount of momentum to launch over certain hurdles or obstacles that we can anticipate. So I'll go ahead and upload this, and I think I'll make a little Facebook group for, I don't know if I can with Vicky, but anyway, we'll work that out and see what kind of discussion can result. Obviously, folks can respond by video, respond by audio, or type whatever is convenient to you, or call me, however you want to work it. All right, thanks for your interest. I look forward to hearing your responses, as well as watching the discussion between the different people if that does manifest.